Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. David Dobrzykowski. I'm an associate professor here at the Walton College of Business in the Department of Supply Chain Management at the University of Arkansas. I'm here today with Emi Cardarelli, who's the Director of Club Sales and Sustainability at Unilever. And we're here today really to talk about how the coronavirus crisis has influenced her operation and supply chain, and also how she's applying, project management ideas in the midst of this crisis. So, Emi, welcome. It's good to be with you today.
David, thanks so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Completely different way of working, but happy to be joining your class.
that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, thanks for doing this. I appreciate your flexibility in our new world. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you're dealing with at Unilever in this coronavirus crisis?
Absolutely. So just to level set everyone for a minute, I work for Unilever, big house of brands. We have a large breadth of household brands that you see every day, spanning from the personal hygiene side of the business with deodorant, shampoo, body wash, to the food side of the business with your Knorr, your Lipton, your ice cream, your Ben and Jerry's. So a little bit of everything. That being said, the impact that COVID has had on us, as you can all probably imagine, has been tremendous. Primarily the pressures that we are seeing, the additional pressures that we are seeing and that our supply chain is feeling right now. Across the board, the demand has surged. And the supply and the raw materials of the supply and the supply chain obviously did not surge with that demand because this was so unprecedented and so unexpected. So we have seen a significant demand across the board, not only at the customers that I manage. So David mentioned I manage the wholesale business. That's Costco, Sam's Club, and BJ's nationwide. But what we've seen across the board with all of our local grocers, with Walmart, with our drug chain, is just this demand has surged to unprecedented levels. Some of the things that we're doing right now because of what we've seen is one of the first things that our supply chain team did is they went to see what their raw materials look like. What can we continue to manufacture? What can we not continue to manufacture? And what's blowing off the shelves faster than other things, or some of the different forms of analyses and things that we do to figure out how we're going to tackle this challenge that it is and make sure that we can keep product on the shelves for our customers and for our consumers every day.
Yeah, well, that's really terrific. And I'm so pleased that you use this term unprecedented several times there. And I think that this is really a concept that a lot of supply chain experts and supply chain professionals and certainly consumers, I think, are kind of forgetting. You're hearing a lot about the fragility of the supply chain design. You're hearing a lot about how perhaps ideas like lean really, have placed us in a vulnerable position. And I think that, while those might be, statements that have a degree of truth to them, people are forgetting that this is not standard operating procedure. This is not a typical spike in demand because your customer ran a sale. This is just an unprecedented, like you said, crisis that, is, I'm hoping, a 100-year crisis, right, for
Right.
us. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. And tell us a little bit about how you're approaching this and, what you think can be done.
Right. So the strain that we've felt has not only been on the supply chain, but on the organization as a whole. But it does boil down to the supply chain because that's really what gets our products moving in and out. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depends on how you look at it. The initial breakout, as we all know, started in two locations, in China and in Italy. We have a research and development facility in Italy, and that was one of the geographic locations that Unilever was initially impacted by. So a few weeks ahead of the curve and before it got to the U.S., our global organization began to see and to pull together some of the best practices and the different things that were being done there so that we could immediately apply them here and at least have a little bit of a buffer, with the situation. So we saw things starting to shut down. We did a lot of things at the factory and at the facility level, and then that just migrated over here to the U.S. and really around the globe where we've got facilities, internationally. In the U.S., some of the things that we immediately did was, first thing was first to take care of our people, right? Make sure everyone was okay, and make sure everyone is being taken care of. Then we took some pretty extreme measures in our facilities as far as safety, security, and quality were concerned to be able to maintain the integrity of the output of our manufacturing facilities, as well as the health and safety of our folks. So we ramped up. I mean, a lot of our facilities are pretty high standard facilities as it is. So ramping things up, kind of just makes that before. No, it's just the additional measures. If you got sprayed down and wiped down once, well, then we're doing it twice. And those folks coming into the manufacturing facilities still, temperatures are being taken. Effective March 13th globally was when we decided to close most of our offices and allow people the ability to work from home. So there were a lot of different measures that were taken globally to prepare us for some of this, but nothing prepared us for the amount and the speed at which the product would be moving off of the shelf from the consumers. So really just trying to get our supply chain to speed up, and we're also limited to the trucking companies and how many trucks we could secure in addition to what we already had. So you're going out to the spot market to figure out how you're securing more trucks, or you're working with some of your customers that have abilities to backhaul, such as Walmart's and some of the others, and they're wanting to pick up the product. Well, there's only so much product you can output when it's moving off of the shelf so fast. Sure. So just top line, going back to your questions on some of the things we did to address it, we're figuring out our people were okay. We've really ramped up communication. I mean, if we had 4 or 5, 6 meetings a day, now we have 8, 10, 12 calls a day. It's like, okay. And a lot of them calls are business calls, and other calls are back to our people. It's just making sure and checking in our people are okay. I've got Thursday afternoons of a virtual coffee chat with my team where we put everything business to one side and we just chat about the different things we're doing, because we're still human and we need to maintain that line of communication, because even though we're not in the office, the job still needs to get done. Product still needs to get to our customers and on the shelf.
That's funny, because even here in the Walton College, we've transitioned to virtual meetings, of course, and we had a meeting the other day, and when the meeting was wrapping up, I asked everybody, I said, hey, who's going to bring coffee next time? It's funny you mentioned that.
I'm planning a happy hour at the end of the day, one of these days this week, just to say, hey, we survived another week.
Sounds like a great idea.
Different ways of working. One of the biggest challenges that we have seen, David, on the supply chain side is because there has been so much demand, there's obviously not enough output to satisfy that demand right now, and we have had to take, I say we, our supply chain team, I'm just the communicator between the supply chain team and our customers, really, but we have had the need to really look into what our production capacity is right now, and we are looking into allocations. And allocations become very difficult amongst customers and amongst the different retailers out there, because of course everyone wants their fair share. And as a customer team, well, the first thing I'm going to do is advocate for my customers, whereas the CVS and Walgreens team is going to advocate for their customers, and everyone wants everything. So it's really figuring out, okay, well, there's not enough for everyone, so how do we allocate it? And that's where a couple of examples of project management come into play, because there's so many different thoughts on how you can do this, right? Do you do it in a sense where you're breaking it up and making it, equal parts to distribute it with your sales? If I'm 50% of the sales, then I should get 50% of the allocation. Or do you go that step deeper and say, well, maybe we're seeing a trend and an increase in online and pickup sales. So maybe those customers that are having more online and grocery pickup should have a little bit more of that allocation to prepare them for what's coming. Sure. So it's been, we've had a couple of streams of work streams and of project teams working on that to see what the best way to do it is. There is no best way, because we're all learning from this, right? And then, oh, by the way, let's keep all of our customers happy. Right. Because they want to keep their consumers. And when I say customer, I mean my Sam's Club, Costco, BJ's. When I say consumer, it's the person that's buying it on the shelf to consume it at home. So we want to make sure that ultimately, regardless of where the consumer is purchasing it, that it's available for them to have. Another thing that we've had to look at, and we've really had different project teams and project management teams figure out what the best route in that avenue is line efficiencies and capacity efficiencies in our different manufacturing facilities. If we had, a perfect example would be our Dove body wash or our Dove soap. We usually have 8, 10, 12 fragrances, or if we look at our food with our ice cream, we have 8, 10, 12 different flavors. Well, just to be as efficient as we can with the capacity on the lines, do we narrow that down and just eliminate the bottom performing, 6 or 8 and keep the top 2 or 3, and at least everyone is getting that top 2 or 3. So that's been, some other decisions that we've got different teams managing and figuring out what the most efficient thing is going to be when it comes to that.
Well, thanks for that. It's really interesting that you brought up allocation, of course, because I do, of course, a lot of work in healthcare supply chain, and the healthcare supply chain, of course, everyone's talking about PPE. If you didn't know what PPE was, a month ago, everyone's an expert today, of course. And allocation is, a key, inventory kind of concept that has, again, everybody's becoming very familiar with. I had one distributor tell me the other day that, if I would have called my hand sanitizer manufacturer a month ago, they would have said, you can buy, sure, place an order for hand sanitizer. You can buy 200% of what your average order has been. And if I would have called them 3 weeks ago, they would have said 150%. And a week ago, it was a 100%. And he told me today, if I call that hand sanitizer and tell them I'd like to place an order, they would say, great, order whatever you want. It's on back order.
Well, it's funny you say that, because they initially, when we were talking about allocation on some of our items, my team was told, well, we'll ship to 100%. You've got 100% of your allocation. I'm like, you can't produce 100%. How am I going to ship 100% if you can't produce it right now? So it's been a little bit hectic in that sense.
I'm also excited and intrigued by the idea that you mentioned that you're taking a bit of an unconventional approach to thinking about allocation, as opposed to just a percentage of previous sales or average previous sales. You're actually thinking about how these customers are distributing product to their consumers, and I think that's a really innovative way to think about things. Again, back to healthcare, I'm doing some work with some large, using this term not as a term of art, but just a general description of large group purchasing organizations right now. And they're thinking about, well, how do we allocate medical supplies across the United States? And the knee-jerk reaction, of course, is hotspots, hotspots, hotspots. And that's terrific and important, of course, and that would result in all these supplies going to the coasts. But the truth is, if you look over, everybody's familiar now again with the inverted U-shaped distribution curve. Everybody's going back to their statistics class, right? And but if you think about each state's distribution curve, while they might be slightly different, they all overlap substantially. So while the middle of the country, right, might be a week or 10 days behind the coasts or some of the hot spots, that's not a lot of time from a lead time perspective. So,
Right.
A lot of these organizations that are attempting to provide medical supplies are thinking about this allocation idea much in the way that you are, unconventional type of thinking around fairness and equity.
We also see the retailers responding to it, saying, hey, this is also something we've never seen before, and these are the actions we're taking. Most of the retailers that are, at least in our area here, and that have presence across the country, have either reduced their hours so that they can have their folks stocking overnight so that the consumer can come in the morning and find the product. They've shut down parts of the box that are non-essential. I know Walmart shut down their Tire, Lube, and Express and some of the other areas of the store to put that manpower into the rest of the store and stock it up overnight. They reduced their hours even further. I think Walmart hours right now are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., which in an organization that has, 5,000 stores last count I had when I was still at Walmart, but where at least half of those or 3/4 of those are 24-hour stores, that's a huge hit.
Sure.
And in addition to that, I know that in an effort to take care of their people, as I mentioned, Unilever's taking care of our people, they've, put out quarterly bonuses. They've increased minimum wage for those people that are still there. They're hiring people because so many people are being let off right now. It's just a different time that we're living in, and every retailer and business is trying to manage as they see fit. We've also seen some, speaking of some different or unconventional business practices, which is fantastic for the people out there, is a lot of people are opening an hour or 2 hours earlier in the morning for seniors to be able to shop, those that are more vulnerable or at high risk. We really see the humanity coming out in this also, which is, it's horrible that this is a circumstance that we have to live through to see it, but it's really enlightening to see that that's still coming through.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, thanks for that. So that's interesting. In supply chain, fundamentally, we're about managing flows of information, material, and financial exchanges, all aimed at trying to integrate supply and demand, right? And so you've talked a little bit about allocation, which is a nice demand side kind of tool, and then you actually talked about production planning as well. What kind of SKUs do we drop from production and so forth. So there's kind of the supply side, aspect of your strategy as well. So I think that's a really kind of wise approach to integrating the two. Anything else that you'd like to share with us, either from a project management perspective or just in
Sure,
general
sure.
about your
I'll
approach?
share a couple of things. Like I said, I'm on the sales side of the business. We've got our supply chain and manufacturing side. We also have our folks at corporate who do a lot of the planning or the brand marketing team. So every one of these teams has really had to figure out and put different methods of project management into play. Unilever more recently, in the past year and a half to 2 years, versus some of the other big companies out there, has began to implement agile methodology. So there's a lot of different lines and different scrum teams figuring out what they're doing, with this agile methodology, and how do we make things move faster? How can we make quicker decisions with this? How do we leverage agile in situations like this? And the reality is, although it is very beneficial, you're still at the mercy of potentially your ability of obtaining raw materials. I may have my full plan in place to manage a certain project, but it could come to a screeching halt because you can't, you're unable to source some of the materials that you need. So we're looking into that. Okay, well, if this is plan A, then what's plan B? So it's really coming together and using different project management principles, really having to flex and being okay with other people stepping into your lane sometimes. A lot of us are used to working in our own lane, and right now it's just one of those times where it's like, okay, can't take any of this personal. This is business. We're trying to get stuff out. You're going to step in my lane. Go ahead, go in my lane. Just don't jack stuff up. Right? That's all
Sure.
you can really hope for right now.
Sure.
But it has been really really challenging, and we're figuring it out day by day. Even ways of working. This is my home office. I know we were chatting a little bit earlier about some of the nuances of working from home. I've got a 3-year-old. I was on a customer call yesterday, and as much as my husband tried to block his entering my office, he had a baby gate up, the door was shut, and the kids still managed to jump in right when I was talking to a customer, and I just had to put him in my lap and go with the flow and say, hey, we're human, we're trying to figure this out together. And this is what it's going to take, right? And there's some things that you're kind of thankful for. Maybe that additional walk that you get to take right now to say, all right, I just have to get outside, I have to walk, and maybe you don't do that in the office every day, but it's really the ability to adapt, and not only project management in the supply chain, but really managing home life. Because I'm sure you and each one of your students has a life that they have to figure out how to manage, and the balls that they're juggling in this new normal as well. And managing the project of life is really no different than managing a certain project, in a workspace. It's really figuring out what works best for you at this time.
Boy,
One last thing that I wanted to share with you, which was something I learned that was really neat, just in the Unilever sense, and I know a lot of other companies are doing different things, is figuring out how we help our community as well. There have been a lot of local companies that have answered the call to help. I know there were a couple of examples of Pernod Ricard in Fort Smith that answered the governor's call to start producing batch alcohol to use for sanitizing. Unilever has a hand sanitizer and cleansing brand outside of the U.S., which we've actually brought the formulas in, and we're beginning to manufacture it. It's not quite available for sale commercially, but we're able to manufacture it and supply it for the cleansing of our facilities and also for local hospitals. So that's just one of the things that we're trying to do to give back and figure out how we adjust to a new normal and abnormal situation.
Oh, that's really fantastic. I appreciate your technical supply chain insights, of course. Around allocation and production planning, and using agile methodologies, and forget about dual sourcing, right? But just creative sourcing to increase capacity. But I also really appreciate your message regarding humanity, and the humanity that this crisis has really brought to the forefront of the way that we operate our businesses and our supply chain. So thank you for that. So without further ado, Emi Cardarelli, Director of Wholesale Club Sales and Sustainability at Unilever, thanks for being with me today. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure, David. Hopefully, in the future, I'll actually be able to join in person and maybe bring some sweet frozen treats that we've got to share with your class.
Well, that would be terrific. And I end every session with a woo pig suey.
Woo pig! I am a
take,
Razorback.
take care. Thank you.
Bye.